The autumn of 1941 settles over Prague like a shroud. The city, a fairy tale jewel of Gothic spires and cobblestone streets, holds its breath, its ancient beauty, now the backdrop for a new and terrible kind of order. Swastika banners hang from the walls of Prague Castle, stark red and black wounds against the gray stone. Down below, the city moves with a hushed, fearful rhythm. This is a city under occupation, but more than that, it is a city under the gaze of one man. From his seat of power in the castle that looms over the Vltava River, he watches, and the city trembles. His name is Reinhard Heydrich. He is the perfect, terrifying embodiment of the Nazi ideal, a living statue carved from Nordic ice. He is tall, impossibly blonde, an accomplished fencer and horseman, a gifted violinist. His face, long and aquiline, could have been handsome were it not for the absolute coldness in his pale blue eyes like chips of glacial ice that seem to analyze, dissect, and condemn all they see. He moves with an athletic grace, but it is the grace of a predator, taut and ever ready. To the world, he is the Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia. To the Czechs, who whisper his name in secret, he is Pražský řezník, the Butcher of Prague. He is the architect of the final solution, the head of the Reich main security office, the man who controls the vast, terrifying apparatus of the Gestapo and the SD. He is a spider at the center of a vast, silent web of terror, and his power is absolute. But this man, this marble effigy of Aryan perfection, is haunted. He is stalked by a shadow that has no physical form, a whisper that has followed him since his boyhood. It is a rumor so poisonous, so antithetical to his very existence, that it threatens the foundation of his world. The rumor is simple and catastrophic, that Reinhard Heydrich, the Blond Beast, the ultimate arbiter of racial purity, has Jewish blood. The whisper claims his paternal grandmother was Jewish, a secret shame hidden in the family's past. For any other man, it might be a footnote of ancestry. For the man tasked with orchestrating the extermination of an entire race, it is a spiritual and political death sentence. Imagine this paragon of Nazism standing before a mirror. He sees the blonde hair, the blue eyes, the features lauded in propaganda posters. He is the ideal. But in the silence of his own mind, the whisper is always there. Is it true? He looks at his own reflection and sees not just an Aryan god, but the ghost of a Jewish grandmother. This secret is the engine of his ferocity. Every act of cruelty, every meticulously planned execution, every signature on a death warrant is not just an act of ideology. It is a desperate, violent attempt to exorcise the demon of doubt within himself. He persecutes the Jewish people with such an inhuman, systematic zeal because he is at war with a phantom, a possibility that resides within his own veins. He must be more Nazi than any Nazi, more ruthless than any butcher, to prove to himself and to the world that the shadow is not real. This is the central paradox of Reinhard Heydrich. He is a man of supreme power, feared even by his own master, Heinrich Himmler. He is the cold, calculating brain behind the Reich's most monstrous crimes. Yet he is also a man walking on a razor's edge, terrified that one day his own racial laws could be turned against him. His entire life is a performance, a desperate and brutal campaign to outrun a shadow. And as he sits in his castle, the absolute master of a conquered nation, the whisper is his only true rival, a ghost that can never be arrested, tortured, or executed. Before the black uniform, before the chilling moniker of Butcher, there was a boy named Reinhard living in a house filled with music. He was born in the town of Halle an der Saale in 1904 into a world that seemed destined for culture and refinement. His father, Bruno Heydrich, was a man of considerable local standing, a composer, an opera singer, and the founder of the Halle Conservatory of Music. The Heydrich household was not a place of politics or ideology. It was a sanctuary of art, its rooms echoing with the strains of Wagner and the meticulous practice of scales and arpeggios. It was here, in this bourgeois cocoon of high German culture, that the future architect of genocide first picked up a violin. And he was good. More than good, he was gifted. The violin, an instrument that demands precision, discipline, and a cool intellectual command of emotion, seemed a natural extension of his being. While his peers played games in the streets, young Reinhard would spend hours practicing, his thin frame bent over the instrument, his focus absolute. His father, a man who worshipped at the altar of German music, saw in his son the potential for greatness. He envisioned a future on the concert stages of Europe, a life dedicated to harmony and beauty. But there was a dissonance in the boy that no amount of musical training could resolve. He was shy, awkward, and possessed a high-pitched voice that subjected him to ridicule. He was an outsider in his own skin, and a poison was already seeping into his world. The poison was a whisper, a playground taunt that would metastasize into a lifelong obsession. It started with his family name. His father's surname was Heydrich, but his grandmother's family name was Krantz. However, her first husband had been a man named Süß, and local gossip, fueled by the casual anti-Semitism of the era, had twisted and conflated the family tree. The name Süß was often associated with Jewish families. From this tiny, ambiguous seed, a monstrous rumor grew. The Heydrichs were not pure. The whisper followed young Reinhard into the schoolyard. Other children, with the thoughtless cruelty of youth, would taunt him, calling him Isidor Süß. Imagine the boy, Reinhard, walking home from school. He is clutching his violin case, a symbol of his family's respectable, cultured world. A group of older boys block his path. They don't shove him or steal his things. They do something far worse. They begin to chant, their voices mocking his own high pitch. Moses, Moses, Itzig Süß. Moses, Moses, Itzig Süß. In that moment, the cultured world his father built shatters. The music in his head is drowned out by the ugly taunt. He feels a hot, sickening wave of shame wash over him, a shame he doesn't even fully understand. His face remains a mask of cold indifference, but inside, something breaks. A cold, hard knot of fury begins to form in his chest, a hatred for the bullies, for the whisper, and for the weakness within himself that allows him to be wounded. He says nothing. He simply pushes past them, his knuckles white on the handle of his violin case, and makes a silent, venomous vow. He will show them. He will become so German, so strong, so utterly perfect, that no one will ever dare to call him Isidor again. This childhood humiliation became the furnace of his ambition. It drove him to seek hyper-masculine validation wherever he could find it. He threw himself into sports, becoming a champion fencer and swimmer, sculpting his body into an Aryan ideal. He joined the Freikorps, the ultra-nationalist paramilitary groups that roamed Germany after World War I, immersing himself in the violent politics of the far right. Every action was a desperate effort to build a fortress of unimpeachable German identity around the crumbling foundation of his own self-doubt. The boy who loved the violin was being consumed by the boy who feared the whisper. The world would one day pay a horrific price for the taunts thrown in a German schoolyard, for the shadow of Isidor Süß would follow Reinhard Heydrich all the way to the top of the Third Reich, fueling his monstrous quest for purity. For a man fleeing the ghosts of his youth, the German Navy, the Reichsmarine, was the perfect sanctuary. The sea offered a brutal, cleansing honesty, and the rigid hierarchy of naval life provided the structure and validation he craved. Here, a man was judged not by whispers and rumors, but by his performance, his discipline, and his command over others. By 1931, Lieutenant Reinhard Heydrich was a rising star. As a signals officer, he was brilliant, quickly mastering the new sciences of radio intelligence and cryptography. He was respected by his superiors and feared by his subordinates. He had built for himself a new identity, clad in the crisp white and gold of a naval officer's uniform. It was a fortress of masculine honor, and he believed it was impregnable. He was wrong. The fortress would be brought down not by an enemy torpedo, but by his own arrogance and a messy affair of the heart. Heydrich, the blonde Adonis of the Baltic Fleet, was a notorious womanizer. He moved through his romantic conquests with the same cold, predatory detachment he applied to his professional duties. But in December of 1930, at a rowing club ball, he met a woman who would change the course of his life, Lena von Osten. She was young, fiercely nationalistic, and a fervent, early admirer of the nascent Nazi Party. She was captivated by the tall, aloof naval officer, and he, in turn, was drawn to her aristocratic bearing and ideological fire. The courtship was a whirlwind. Within days, they were engaged. But Heydrich, in his haste, had failed to untangle the wreckage of a previous relationship. The wreckage had a name: the daughter of an influential shipyard director, a woman to whom Heydrich had also made promises, if not of marriage, then of a future. When she learned of his engagement to Lena, she was heartbroken, and her powerful father was enraged. This was not merely a jilted lover's complaint. In the rigidly traditionalist world of the German officer corps, it was a grave matter of honor. An officer's word was his bond. To behave like a cad was to tarnish the reputation of the entire service. The matter was brought before a naval court of honor, presided over by none other than the stern, unyielding commander of the Navy, Admiral Erich Raeder. Imagine the scene: a stifling, wood-paneled room. Heydrich stands before a panel of grim-faced, older admirals, men who see the Navy as a sacred brotherhood. But Heydrich is not contrite. He is not apologetic. He is arrogant. He views the entire proceeding with a thinly veiled contempt, as a bourgeois drama beneath his station. He equivocates, he condescends, and he fails to show any remorse for the woman's distress. He fundamentally misreads the situation, believing his superior intellect and promising career will shield him. He looks at Admiral Raeder, and instead of showing deference, his eyes hold a flicker of disdain. And in that moment, Raeder sees not just a young officer who made a romantic mistake. He sees a man of flawed character, a man who lacks the fundamental integrity, the very honor that defines an officer. The verdict, when it comes, is a thunderclap. It is not a demotion or a reprimand. It is dismissal. For conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. The words strip him bare. The fortress of his honor has crumbled into dust. The uniform, his armor against the world, is torn from his back. He is once again the humiliated boy in the schoolyard, but this time, the entire world is his audience. The dismissal was a catastrophic public disgrace. At 27 years old, his career was in ruins. His future was a void. He was unemployed in a Germany racked by the Great Depression, his name a byword for dishonor in the only world he respected. He plunged into a deep despair, his ambition curdling into a bitter poison. But Lena, the woman for whom he had sacrificed his career, did not abandon him. Instead, her Nazi fervor provided a new direction. Through her family's connections, she heard of an opportunity, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsfuhrer SS, a man obsessed with building his own black-clad empire, was looking for someone to create an internal intelligence service for the Nazi Party. Heydrich, the disgraced naval signals expert, was, on paper, a perfect fit. With nothing left to lose, he boarded a train to Munich to meet the unassuming, bespectacled chicken farmer who would become his master. The shipwreck of his naval career had washed him ashore at the gates of hell. In the summer of 1931, Reinhard Heydrich arrived in Munich a ghost of a man, his naval uniform and his honor packed away in disgrace. He was adrift in a sea of failure. But fate, in its most twisted form, had thrown him a lifeline. It led him to a nondescript office to meet a man who, on the surface, seemed utterly unimpressive. Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS, was a man of mild manners and myopic vision, a former chicken farmer who spoke in the pedantic tones of a provincial schoolmaster. Yet behind those pince-nez glasses, a grand and monstrous ambition was taking shape. He envisioned his SS not just as Hitler's Praetorian Guard, but as a new Teutonic aristocracy, a black-clad order of racial purity. And this order, he knew, needed an intelligence service. The meeting began with an almost comical misunderstanding. Himmler, having heard that Heydrich was a signals expert, thought he was interviewing a man to build the SS radio communications network. Heydrich, desperate for any opportunity, quickly grasped the true nature of the job. Himmler was looking for a spy master. He needed someone to create an internal security and intelligence service, a shield and a dagger for the Nazi Party. Himmler, impressed by the tall, disciplined ex-officer but still uncertain, decided to set a test, a challenge that would become the stuff of SS legend. He gave Heydrich 20 minutes. 20 minutes to outline, on a single sheet of paper, his vision for such a service. For Heydrich, this was the ultimate do-or-die moment. His entire future hung suspended in those 20 minutes. Locked in an adjutant's office with a typewriter, he did not panic. All the frustration, all the intellectual energy, all the training in naval intelligence that had been so abruptly curtailed now found its focus. He didn't just rehash the models of existing police forces. He drew on his knowledge of the British Secret Intelligence Service, on spy novels, and on his own cold, cynical understanding of human nature. What he proposed was not merely a tool for fighting the party's enemies. It was something far more insidious. He envisioned a service that would spy on everyone. On communists and Jews, yes, but also on government officials, on army generals, and, most importantly, on rival Nazi leaders and wavering party members. He was proposing to build the central nervous system of a police state, an organization that would see all, hear all, and know all. Imagine the ticking of the clock in that small office, each second a hammer blow marking the final moments of Heydrich's old life. The air is stale. He is a man with nothing, his career in ruins, his name a disgrace. And yet, his mind is on fire. The keys of the typewriter clatter with a feverish intensity. He is not just writing a job application, he is inventing his own salvation, and in doing so, he is drafting the blueprint for a continent-wide system of terror. In these few frantic minutes, a monster is being born, not in a laboratory, but in a memorandum. When the adjutant returns, Heydrich hands him the sheet of paper. It is a document that is concise, audacious, and utterly terrifying in its scope. He has taken Himmler's vague idea and given it a spine of ice-cold logic. He has offered him not just a guard dog, but an all-seeing God. Himmler was mesmerized. He had found his man. He had found the brain to his ideological soul. On August 1st, 1931, Heydrich was officially tasked with creating the service that would come to be known as the Sicherheitsdienst, or the SD. The beginnings were laughably humble. His first office was a small, dingy apartment in Munich. His budget was non-existent. His first desk was a borrowed kitchen table, his files stored in old shoeboxes. He was a one-man intelligence agency. But from this pathetic seed, he began to cultivate a vast and deadly organism. He recruited a strange new breed of Nazi, not the beer hall brawlers of the SA, but unemployed academics, disgraced lawyers, and frustrated intellectuals, men who shared his cynical worldview and his belief in information as the ultimate source of power. He began meticulously building his great card index, a paper brain that would eventually contain the secrets of millions. Every rumor, every piece of gossip, every intercepted letter, every report from an ever-expanding network of informants was filed, cross-referenced, and weaponized. The SD was not an instrument of brute force. It was an instrument of intellectual terror. It was a silent, sprawling web, and at its center, growing more powerful by the day, sat Reinhard Heydrich, the disgraced sailor who had reinvented himself as the Reich's chief architect of fear. By 1934, the Nazi revolution had devoured the German state, but it had not yet begun to devour itself. The party was a viper's nest of competing ambitions, and no ambition was greater or more threatening to Hitler's ultimate power than that of Ernst Röhm, the leader of the Sturmabteilung, the SA. The SA were the brown-shirted thugs who had been the Nazis' battering ram in the streets, a brawling, chaotic horde millions strong. They were a blunt instrument of pure violence, and Röhm, their scarred, bull-necked chief, now felt it was time for his reward. He envisioned his SA absorbing the regular army, the Reichswehr, and himself as the supreme commander of Germany's military might. He spoke openly of a second revolution, a populist uprising against the old elites whom Hitler was now courting. He had become a dangerous liability. In the shadows, a coalition of fear and ambition formed against him. The army's aristocratic generals despised Röhm and his street fighters. Party leaders like Hermann Göring coveted his power. But the most patient and most venomous of his enemies was Heinrich Himmler and his ambitious protege, Reinhard Heydrich. To them, the SA was a clumsy, plebeian rival to their new black-uniformed elite. The elimination of Röhm was not a matter of ideology. It was a corporate takeover, a chance to seize a monopoly on state-sanctioned violence. And Heydrich, the architect of fear, was tasked with drawing up the plans. This was the moment Heydrich's SD truly came of age. He did not prepare for a street fight. He prepared for a paper massacre. From his Berlin headquarters on Wilhelmstrasse, he and his network of informants began weaving a web of lies around Röhm. They compiled a vast dossier, a masterpiece of insinuation and fabrication. They took real facts, Röhm's homosexuality, his grandiose speeches, and twisted them into evidence of a planned coup, a putsch. Heydrich worked with a cold, feverish intensity, not like a soldier preparing for battle, but like an accountant preparing an audit of death. His greatest creation for the purge was not a weapon, but a document, the kill list. On long sheets of paper, he and his staff methodically typed out the names of those to be liquidated. The list began with the SA leadership, but it did not end there. It grew to include old enemies of the party, inconvenient conservatives, troublesome journalists, personal rivals, anyone whose death would be politically expedient. It was the first time Heydrich organized murder on an industrial scale, and he approached it with the soulless efficiency of a factory manager. The 30th of June, 1934. The purge begins. But Heydrich is not in the streets with a pistol in his hand. He is in his office, a modern, sterile space far removed from the coming bloodshed. The room is quiet, except for the incessant ringing of telephones and the staccato rhythm of the teletype machine spitting out new reports. He stands before a large map of Germany, moving pins and making notes with a grease pencil. Aides scurry in and out, their faces pale with a mixture of excitement and terror. They bring him reports. Röhm arrested. Von Schleicher has been shot. Strasser eliminated. With each confirmation, Heydrich takes a pen and calmly, precisely, draws a line through a name on his list. There is no emotion on his face, no triumph, no remorse. He is simply a project manager overseeing a complex logistical operation. He is not killing men. He is balancing an account. In this clean, well-lit office, the true bureaucratic horror of the Nazi regime is laid bare. It is not the madness of a mob. It is the methodical, administrative precision of a man striking names off a list. The purge was a brutal success. Over a long weekend, the Night of the Long Knives claimed at least 85 lives and likely hundreds more. Hitler himself arrested a groggy Röhm at a lakeside hotel. Across Germany, SS death squads, armed with Heydrich's lists, dragged men from their homes and shot them without trial or ceremony. When the bloodletting was over, the SA was a decapitated, powerless shell. The army, relieved and grateful, swore a personal oath of allegiance to Adolf Hitler, and the SS was triumphant. Reinhard Heydrich had received his baptism in blood. He had proven to Hitler and Himmler that he was not just a spy master, but a man capable of organizing and executing mass murder with chilling competence. He had turned his paper theories of control into a gruesome reality. He was no longer just the architect of fear. He was its chief contractor, and he had just laid the cornerstone for a much larger, more terrible edifice. In the intricate, venomous ecosystem of the Third Reich's leadership, power was a zero-sum game, and loyalty was a currency that was constantly being devalued. No one understood this better than Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich. Theirs was one of the most consequential partnerships in the regime, a symbiotic bond between the high priest of racial ideology and his ruthlessly efficient archdeacon. Himmler provided the grand, quasi-mystical vision. Heydrich provided the cold, administrative genius to turn that vision into a reality of concentration camps and death lists. But as Heydrich's power grew, as his SD became the all-seeing eye of the state, Himmler, a man consumed by paranoia, began to watch his prized subordinate with a growing sense of unease. He was the master, but he feared the ambition of his creation. He needed a leash. The leash, he knew, was already there, buried in Heydrich's past. The old whispers from the Holly schoolyard had never truly died. They were a persistent ghost in the corridors of power, a delicious piece of gossip eagerly circulated by Heydrich's many rivals, from the old guard of the party to the generals of the army. Heydrich Süß. The rumor of Jewish ancestry was the perfect poison, a single drop of which could dissolve the career of even the most powerful man in the SS. And Himmler, the ultimate collector of secrets, decided he needed to know the truth. Not to destroy Heydrich, he was far too valuable for that, but to control him. A definitive file on Heydrich's bloodline would be the ultimate insurance policy, a sword of Damocles that Himmler could hold forever over his subordinate's perfectly blonde head. In an act of supreme irony, Himmler commissioned the investigation using the very machine Heydrich himself had built. He secretly ordered genealogists within the SD, men loyal to him personally, to conduct a thorough and clandestine review of Reinhard Heydrich's family tree. It was a delicate, dangerous task. They delved into the parish registers and municipal archives of Halle and Leipzig, tracing the Heydrich and Krantz family lines back for generations. They were hunting for a single name, a single entry in a dusty ledger that would confirm the presence of a Jewish ancestor. The spy master was being spied upon by his own spies, his past dissected by the same intrusive methods he used to destroy others. Imagine Heydrich in his vast office at the Reich main security office. He is the spider at the center of the web, reading through files that contain the darkest secrets of Germany's most powerful men. He knows who is having an affair, who is in debt, who has a dissident uncle. He holds the ruin of 1,000 men in his filing cabinets, but he feels a cold draft in this perfectly sealed room. He senses the investigation, even if he cannot prove it. The watcher feels the unsettling prickle of being watched. He catches his subordinates looking at him with a little too much curiosity. He sees Himmler observing him during meetings with an unnerving, paternalistic gaze. He feels like a patient being examined for a terminal disease by a doctor who refuses to share the diagnosis. The paranoia he instills in others is now turning inward. Every glance, every whispered conversation in a hallway becomes a potential threat. The master of secrets is being haunted by the fear of his own. The investigation reached a dead end. The researchers were able to trace Heydrich's lineage back to the 17th century, and they found no evidence of any Jewish ancestry. The grandmother's second husband, Süß, was indeed a Protestant. The file presented to Himmler was, on its face, a clean bill of health. But in the paranoid world of the Third Reich, the absence of proof was not the same as innocence. The investigation itself was the point. Himmler now had his file. It was a file that proved Heydrich was pure, but the very existence of the investigation was the weapon. He could now subtly remind Heydrich that his purity was not a given, but something that had been questioned and graciously confirmed by his master. The leash was now firmly in place. Heydrich, for his part, was forced to live with the chilling knowledge that his own past had been held up to the light and judged. His response was to plunge even deeper into the bloody work of the Reich, to be ever more ruthless, ever more zealous, as if each act of persecution was a renewed, desperate attempt to prove his own purity. The shadow, even after being officially banished, would never truly leave him. On the 20th of January, 1942, 15 senior officials of the Nazi state gathered in a beautiful villa on the shores of the Great Wannsee, a picturesque lake on the outskirts of Berlin. The setting was idyllic, a place of serene beauty now commandeered for a purpose of unimaginable ugliness. The men who arrived were not, for the most part, the jackbooted thugs of popular imagination. They were state secretaries, ministry directors, and legal experts, the educated, bureaucratic elite of the Third Reich. They were served cognac and fine cigars, and they had gathered at the invitation of SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich to coordinate the logistics for the systematic murder of 11 million people. This was the Wannsee Conference, and Heydrich was its chairman and master of ceremonies. He was at the zenith of his power. Just months earlier, Hermann Göring had issued him a vaguely worded but terrifyingly broad authorization to make all necessary preparations for a total solution to the Jewish question in the German sphere of influence. This conference was the result. It was not, as is often misunderstood, the meeting where the final solution was decided upon. The decision to commit genocide had already been made by Hitler and his inner circle, and the mass killings by the Einsatzgruppen on the Eastern Front were already well underway. The purpose of Wannsee was something far more chilling. It was a corporate board meeting to ensure the smooth, efficient, and bureaucratically sound implementation of the Holocaust across all departments of the state. Heydrich conducted the meeting not as a ranting ideologue, but as a cool, efficient corporate executive chairing a strategy session. He was calm, articulate, and utterly professional. There was no talk of morality, no debate about the right or wrong of their task. The discussion was purely practical. How would the railways be scheduled to transport millions of people to the east? What was the legal definition of a Jew for the purposes of extermination? How would the property of the murdered be seized and processed? The minutes of the meeting, recorded by Adolf Eichmann and known as the Wannsee Protocol, are one of the most terrifying documents in human history, precisely because of their bland, businesslike tone. It is the language of logistics, not of murder. Imagine the scene inside the villa. Sunlight streams through the tall windows, glinting off the polished wood of the conference table. Through the glass, the lake is a placid, shimmering blue. Heydrich stands at the head of the table, a large chart behind him displaying the Jewish populations of various European countries, listed with the precision of a corporate earnings report. He speaks in a calm, measured voice, without passion or hatred. He refers to evacuation to the east, special treatment, and natural reduction. The language is a sterile veil drawn over a chasm of horror. One of the attendees, a state secretary, raises a point not about the morality of the plan, but about the legal complexities of dealing with Mischlinge, people of mixed Jewish and Aryan heritage. Heydrich listens patiently, then provides a clear, decisive answer, as if settling a minor point of corporate policy. In this quiet, civilized room, surrounded by educated men in well-tailored suits, the industrialization of death is being planned, not with screams and shouts, but with the quiet murmur of administrative consensus. It is the absolute triumph of the bureaucratic mindset over the human soul. The meeting lasted no more than 90 minutes. In that short span of time, Heydrich achieved his primary goal. He had secured the cooperation, and thus the complicity, of the entire German state apparatus. The foreign ministry would handle the diplomatic issues of rounding up Jews in occupied and allied countries. The Ministry of Transport would provide the trains. The Ministry of Justice would provide the legal framework. It was a masterpiece of administrative maneuvering. He had made every single one of them a partner in the crime, spreading the responsibility so thinly that no one man felt its full weight. When the meeting concluded, the attendees departed, their respective ministries now officially enrolled as cogs in the machinery of genocide. Heydrich had transformed the Holocaust from a chaotic series of massacres into a centrally managed, statewide industrial project. He was not just the architect of fear, he was now the chief operating officer of murder, the ultimate bureaucrat of the final solution. In September of 1941, Reinhard Heydrich arrived in Prague, a city simmering with quiet defiance. The Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, the rump of what had once been Czechoslovakia, was a vital industrial hub for the German war machine, but its factories were plagued by strikes and sabotage. The Czech resistance, though not openly at war, was a constant, festering thorn in the side of the Reich. The previous Reich protector, a mild-mannered diplomat, had failed to crush this spirit. Hitler, enraged and impatient, decided to unleash his most effective and ruthless administrator. He sent Heydrich, appointing him deputy Reich protector, though in reality he was the absolute plenipotentiary ruler. His mission was simple: pacify the Czechs and turn their industrial might fully toward Germany's victory. Heydrich descended upon Prague not with the bluster of a conqueror, but with the cold precision of a surgeon preparing to excise a tumor. On his very first day in office, he declared a state of civil emergency. The hammer fell almost immediately. He bypassed the existing Czech legal system, establishing his own SS and police summary courts. Arrests began that very night. His targets were the nerve centers of the resistance: intellectuals, former army officers, and members of the Sokol, a patriotic gymnastics organization. The Prime Minister of the Protectorate government, Alois Eliáš, who had been secretly communicating with the government in exile in London, was arrested at his desk, tried for treason, and sentenced to death. This was the beginning of the reign of terror that would earn Heydrich his infamous epithet, the Butcher of Prague. The walls of the city were plastered with red posters, each one listing the names of those executed that day. It was a campaign of calculated psychological warfare. The executions were not hidden. They were advertised, designed to sever the head of the resistance and terrorize the body into submission. Within weeks, hundreds had been killed, thousands more sent to concentration camps. The resistance network was shattered, its leaders dead or in hiding. Fear, cold and pervasive, settled over the city. But Heydrich's method was more sophisticated than simple butchery. He understood that pure terror was inefficient. He complemented his iron fist with a velvet glove, a cynical strategy he called Zuckerbrot und Peitsche, whip and sugarloaf. While the whip fell on the resistance, the sugarloaf was offered to the industrial workers, the backbone of the Czech economy. He dramatically increased their rations, providing them with extra meat, fat, and shoes, luxuries unheard of elsewhere in the occupied territories. He improved social security benefits, offered free holidays at confiscated luxury spas, and clamped down on the black market that had made life impossible for ordinary people. It was a deeply cynical yet brilliant social contract. In exchange for their political soul and their labor, he would give them a full stomach. Imagine you are a worker at the massive Skoda Works factory. For months you have lived in a state of quiet rebellion, doing just enough to get by, perhaps occasionally misplacing a tool or causing a small delay. You hate the Germans, but you have a family to feed. Then Heydrich arrives. One day, you hear that a professor you admired has been shot. A few days later, your own factory foreman, a man known for his patriotic fervor, simply vanishes. The fear is a physical presence in the factory. But then, something strange happens. Your weekly food ration, once barely enough to survive, is suddenly increased. You receive a coupon for a new pair of sturdy work boots, the first you've had in years. Your wife is overjoyed. For the first time in ages, your children don't go to bed hungry. You stand at your lathe, the machine churning out artillery shells for the German war machine, and you are torn. Your heart is with the resistance, but your stomach, and the well-being of your family, is with the butcher. Heydrich has not just occupied your country, he has occupied your conscience, forcing you into a daily, soul-crushing compromise. This dual strategy was terrifyingly effective. Factory output soared. The strikes and sabotage stopped. The Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia became a model of quiescent productivity, a quiet, efficient factory for the Reich. Heydrich, with his family, moved into a grand villa outside Prague, living like a feudal lord. He would drive into the city each day in his open-topped, dark green Mercedes, a symbol of his untouchable power. He had broken the back of the resistance and won, if not the hearts, then the grudging compliance of the masses. He had become the undisputed king of a conquered land. But in London, the Czech government in exile, watching this cynical success with horror, came to a grim conclusion. The butcher was too good at his job. He had to be stopped. And a plan, codenamed Anthropoid, began to take shape. While Reinhard Heydrich reigned as the self-satisfied king of Prague, a storm was gathering in the cold, damp skies of Great Britain. In London, the Czechoslovak government in exile, led by Edvard Beneš, watched Heydrich's pacification program with a mixture of horror and desperation. The butcher's cynical strategy of whip and sugarloaf was working all too well, extinguishing the last embers of active resistance. Beneš knew that a dramatic, defiant act was needed to prove to the world and to the Czech people themselves that the nation was not broken. He needed to show the Allies that Czechoslovakia was still in the fight. The decision was made. Heydrich had to die. The mission was given the code name Operation Anthropoid, a zoological term meaning having the form of a human. It was an apt name for a task that would require almost superhuman courage. The British Special Operations Executive, SOE, the secret organization tasked with setting Europe ablaze, took charge of the training. From a pool of 2,000 exiled Czech soldiers, 2 men were chosen for the main assassination team: Warrant Officer Josef Gabčík, a fiery Slovak locksmith, and Staff Sergeant Jan Kubiš, a quiet, steady Czech farmer's son. Their training in the remote and rugged highlands of Scotland was brutally intensive. They were taught to kill silently, to handle explosives, and to live off the land. The SOE's weapons specialists even designed a special bomb for them, a modified anti-tank grenade powerful enough to destroy Heydrich's armored Mercedes, yet small enough to be concealed in a briefcase. In the final days of 1941, their training complete, Gabčík and Kubiš boarded a Royal Air Force Halifax bomber. On the night of December 28th, Under the cover of darkness, they parachuted into the frozen countryside of their occupied homeland. The landing did not go as planned. Navigational errors meant they were dropped miles from their intended target near Pilsen. For weeks, they were ghosts in their own country, moving from one safe house to another, relying on the bravery of the local resistance contacts who, upon learning the true nature of their mission, were terrified. Leaders of the domestic resistance begged the government in exile to call off the attack, warning that the Nazi reprisals would be immeasurable. But the order from London was firm. The mission must proceed. For 5 months, Gabčík and Kubiš lived in the shadows of Prague, meticulously planning their attack. They studied Heydrich's daily routine, noting with astonishment how casually he traveled. Confident that his terror campaign had succeeded, the Butcher of Prague often drove from his villa to the castle in an unescorted, open-topped car, a flagrant disregard for his own security. The assassins chose their spot, a sharp, hairpin turn in the Prague suburb of Líbin, where the Mercedes would be forced to slow to a crawl. It was here they would make their stand. The morning of May 27th, 1942. The sun is bright. Gabčík and Kubiš stand at the tram stop, their hearts pounding a frantic rhythm against their ribs. Gabčík clutches a raincoat, its folds concealing a Sten submachine gun. Kubiš carries a briefcase containing the bomb. They are two ordinary men about to commit an act that will echo through history. They look like any other commuters waiting for a tram, yet they are the focused, physical embodiment of a nation's will to resist. A third man, Josef Walczak, stands 100 yards up the road, ready to signal the car's approach with a small mirror. For an eternity, nothing happens. The street is filled with the normal sounds of a city at mid-morning. Then, Walczak's mirror flashes. The dark green Mercedes is coming. This is it. There is no turning back. In these final seconds before the attack, all the training, all the fear, all the hopes of a conquered nation are distilled into the actions of two men on a quiet suburban street corner. The dark green Mercedes-Benz 320C convertible, its SS3 license plate glinting in the morning sun, approached the hairpin turn in Holešovice. Inside, Reinhard Heydrich sat impassively beside his driver, SS Oberscharführer Johannes Klein. The butcher was on his way to the airport for a flight to Berlin, confident and unguarded. As the car slowed to navigate the sharp bend, Josef Gabčík made his move. He dropped his raincoat, stepped into the path of the car, and raised his Sten submachine gun, aiming directly at Heydrich. In that split second, the meticulously planned operation fell apart. Gabčík squeezed the trigger. Click. Nothing. The Sten gun, a weapon notorious for jamming, had failed him at the most critical moment in his life. Heydrich, his predator's instincts screaming, made a fatal error. Instead of ordering his driver to speed away, he did the opposite. Enraged at the audacity of the attack, he stood up in the car, drew his own Luger pistol, and yelled at Klein to halt. He chose to fight. As the Mercedes braked to a stop, John Kubiš, who had been waiting on the opposite side of the road, seized his chance. He ran toward the car and threw his specially modified anti-tank grenade. But in the heat of the moment, his aim was off. Instead of landing inside the convertible, the bomb fell short, striking the car's right rear fender and exploding against the wheel. The explosion was deafening. A black cloud of smoke and debris engulfed the car, shattering the windows of a nearby tram. Shrapnel tore through the bodywork of the Mercedes and ripped into Heydrich's right side, from his arm to his hip. For a moment, both Heydrich and Klein seemed stunned, but otherwise unharmed. Heydrich, fueled by adrenaline and fury, staggered out of the wrecked car, pistol still in hand, and opened fire on the fleeing Gabčík. Klein, recovering from his shock, ran after Kubiš, who jumped on his bicycle and pedaled away, firing his own Colt pistol into the air to scatter the panicked crowd. Heydrich tried to give chase, but after a few stumbling steps, he suddenly doubled over, his face pale and contorted in agony. He staggered to the side of the road, collapsing against the bonnet of his wrecked car, unable to go on. Seeing his superior down, Klein abandoned his pursuit of Kubisch and rushed back to Heydrich, who, in a pained whisper, pointed at Gabčík and gasped, "Get that bastard!" But it was too late. Gabčík shot Klein in the leg and escaped into the confusion of the city. Believing the attack had failed, both assassins disappeared into their separate escape routes. Heydrich, the architect of terror, the untouchable blonde god of the Reich, now stood bleeding and broken on a suburban Prague street, supported by his wounded driver. Czech civilians, moments before paralyzed by fear of this very man, now cautiously approached. A woman rushed forward with a first aid kit. Another offered him a glass of water. They saw not the Butcher of Prague, but a wounded man in agony. He was taken to the nearby Bulovka hospital, where he was initially arrogant and dismissive of the Czech doctors, demanding to be treated by a German surgeon from Berlin. His injuries, at first, did not seem life-threatening. He had a fractured rib, a ruptured diaphragm, and a damaged spleen. The surgeon successfully removed the shrapnel and the mangled spleen. For a week, he seemed to be on the road to recovery. Himmler even sent his personal physician, Karl Gebhardt, to oversee his care. But something else, something unseen and far deadlier than the metal shrapnel, had been blasted into his body. The grenade's explosion had driven fragments of the car's upholstery, a mixture of metal wire, fabric, and horsehair, deep into his wounds. A virulent infection took hold. On June 3rd, he fell into a coma. At 4:30 in the morning on June 4th, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich, the man with the iron heart, died of systemic sepsis. The Butcher of Prague had been killed not by a bullet, but by a microscopic assassin introduced into his body by a piece of his own car seat. The news of Heydrich's death sent a seismic shockwave through the Third Reich, reaching all the way to Hitler's Alpine retreat. The Führer, consumed by a volcanic rage, demanded a biblical retribution. He ordered Karl Hermann Frank, Heydrich's deputy in Prague, to unleash a wave of terror that would drown the Czech nation in blood and fear. A state of emergency was declared, and a brutal manhunt began. Thousands were arrested and interrogated. The red posters announcing daily executions reappeared on the city walls. The price for any assistance given to the assassins, or even for failing to report them, was death for the entire family. In this atmosphere of frantic paranoia, the Gestapo fixated on a thin, desperate lead. A letter intercepted weeks earlier had vaguely hinted at a connection between the assassins and a family in the small, unremarkable mining village of Lidice, 22 kilometers northwest of Prague. The lead was tenuous, later proven to be entirely false, but the Nazi leadership, hungry for a symbolic act of vengeance, did not need proof. They needed a sacrifice. On the evening of June 9th, the day of Heydrich's grand state funeral in Berlin, Hitler himself gave the order. The village of Lidice was to be annihilated. Under the cover of darkness, units of the German security police and the SD surrounded the sleeping village. At dawn on June 10th, the nightmare began. The villagers were rousted from their beds and herded into the village square. All 173 men and boys over the age of 15 were separated and locked in the cellar of a farmhouse. There, in groups of 10, they were led out into the farm's garden, stood against a wall of mattresses to prevent ricochets, and systematically shot. The executioners worked through the morning and into the afternoon until every man and boy from Lidice was dead. For the women and children, a different, and in some ways more cruel, fate awaited. The 203 women were torn from their children and transported to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where most would eventually perish. The 105 children of Lidice were taken to a temporary camp in a nearby school. There, Nazi racial experts examined them. 9 children who were deemed racially suitable for Germanization were selected and handed over to German SS families. The remaining 82 children were loaded onto trucks and taken to the Chełmno extermination camp in Poland. Upon arrival, they were murdered in gas vans. Imagine the scene after the killings. The village is empty, silent but for the crackling of flames and the lowing of abandoned livestock. German work crews, 100 strong, move in with bulldozers and dynamite. They are not just demolishing the houses, they are erasing the village from existence. They set fire to the church, the school, every home. They dynamite the foundations until nothing remains but rubble. They slaughter every animal, every dog, and every cow. They even desecrate the cemetery, digging up the graves to loot gold fillings from the teeth of the dead before destroying the remains. They reroute the local stream, fill in the village pond, and finally, they cover the entire flattened area with topsoil and plant crops. A barbed wire fence is erected around the barren field, with signs posted that read, "Anyone approaching this fence who does not halt when challenged will be shot." The name Heydrich is struck from all German maps. It has become a non-place, a ghost on the landscape. This was not just murder, it was an attempt to kill memory itself. The Nazis did not hide their crime. They proudly announced the destruction of Heydrich to the world, intending it as a terrifying warning. But the effect was the opposite. Heydrich did not become a symbol of German power. It became an international symbol of Nazi savagery and Czech martyrdom. Across the free world, towns were renamed Heydrich in solidarity. A movement, Heydrich Shall Live, was born, raising funds to one day rebuild the village. In their attempt to erase Heydrich from the map, the Nazis had etched its name into history forever. In the immediate aftermath of his death, the Nazi regime transformed Reinhard Heydrich into a martyr. His grandiose funerals in Prague and Berlin were Wagnerian spectacles of state-sanctioned grief. Hitler himself, placing medals on Heydrich's funeral pillow, called him the man with the iron heart. The SS honored him in the most gruesome way imaginable. The operation to exterminate the Jews of Poland in the killing centers of Bełżec, Sobibor, and Treblinka was codenamed Operation Reinhard. In death, his name became an official brand for the genocide he had engineered. Heydrich was, in many ways, the perfect and most terrifying product of the Nazi system. He was the cold brain that gave structure to Himmler's racial fantasies. He fused academic intelligence with fanatical ideology to create the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, a modern bureaucratic machine of absolute terror. Without Heydrich, the Holocaust would still have happened. The murderous intent was already there, but it may have lacked its horrifying industrial efficiency. He was the ultimate desk murderer, a man who organized the deaths of millions with the same detached precision he might have used to organize a naval fleet or a symphony orchestra. The question of what might have been, had he survived, is a chilling one. Many historians believe that Hitler was grooming him for a much higher command, perhaps even as his eventual successor. His diabolical intelligence, his lack of any moral compass, and his proven administrative genius made him a far more plausible future Führer than the sycophantic Göring or the plodding Himmler. A Third Reich under the command of a man like Heydrich is a terrifying thought experiment. And yet, for all his power, his story remains a study in paradox. He was the Blond Beast, the Aryan ideal, who lived in constant fear of a rumored Jewish ancestor. His entire life was a brutal, overcompensating performance to prove a purity he secretly feared he lacked. He was the devoted family man who was also a callous womanizer. He was the classical musician who orchestrated symphonies of death. These were not contradictions that softened his evil. They were the very engine of it. His insecurities and his burning need for validation made him more ruthless, more ambitious, and more monstrous. In the end, the assassins of Operation Anthropoid did more than kill a single Nazi leader. They struck a blow against the myth of untouchability that surrounded the Reich's elite. And in doing so, they revealed the man behind the monster. The Butcher of Prague, the hangman, the man with the iron heart. He bled, he suffered, and he died a painful, septic death from a wound infected by the stuffing of his own limousine seat. It was a squalid, almost banal end for a man who saw himself as a god of the new order. The shadow of the hangman still looms large over the 20th century, a permanent warning of how modern, educated men can become the willing and efficient architects of hell. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss new videos. There are more amazing stories to come. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.